Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Friday, August 9th, 2024. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. The U.S. supports Ukraine using U.S. weapons in Kursk. So the Pentagon said on Thursday that Ukraine is allowed to use U.S. weapons in its offensive in Russia's Kursk Oblast, which began on Tuesday. So this is the U.S. supporting Ukraine using American weapons inside Russian territory. Pentagon spokeswoman Sabrina Singh was asked if Ukraine's use of U.S.-provided weapons in Kursk was consistent with U.S. policy, and she said it was. And she framed the attack on Kursk as a defensive operation against Russian attacks from across the border, saying that the U.S. has, quote, supported Ukraine from the beginning to defend themselves against attacks that are coming across the border, end quote. For the first 2 years of the war, the U.S. prohibited Ukraine from striking Russian territory with U.S.-provided missiles, but recently lifted that restriction in the wake of Russia's offensive in Kharkiv. The administration claims that it will not support long-range strikes into Russian territory, but it's not clear what the limit is. Singh was actually asked, because what they're saying is, we'll let Ukraine attack across the border where there might be Russian troop formations that are attacking Ukraine or planning to attack Ukraine. And she was asked, okay, let's say there's troops in Moscow that might end up heading west to attack Ukraine. Would the U.S. support Ukraine using U.S. weapons on Moscow? And she said, quote, I'm not going to put a specific range on it, end quote. She added that the purpose of allowing Ukraine to use U.S. weapons in Russia was for crossfire purposes. So I put in a map here from South Front, the fighting in Kursk. They've gotten a few miles into the Russian Oblast here. And this attack was launched from Ukraine's northeastern Sumy Oblast. According to Russia's defense ministry, the South Front put this in. They are claiming that Ukrainian forces lost about 660 troops and 82 armored vehicles, including 8 tanks, 12 armored personnel carriers, 6 infantry fighting vehicles, and 55 armored combat vehicles, and an engineering barrier vehicle. So they're saying Ukraine has taken some pretty heavy losses. I mean, that's a lot of people to be killed, or I would assume that the casualties also include people who are injured. But it's tough to know with the casualty numbers because neither side ever confirms anything. Neither of them put out their own casualty figures, which to me seems very disrespectful to the people who are fighting and dying. But either way, it's clear that there is heavy fighting going on still in Kursk since Ukraine launched this attack into Russian territory. And of course, the risk of escalation here is big. Russia could come back with a major response. I would guess there's going to be some very heavy bombings in Ukraine. And this is, direct U.S. support for Ukrainian ground offensive into Russian territory. And Russia's defense ministry has said that it's destroyed Bradley fighting vehicles, which are U.S.-provided weapons. I'm not sure. I haven't seen anything about them using the HIMARS rocket systems and things like that in strikes inside Kursk, but that doesn't mean that they're not doing it. If the U.S. is giving them permission to, I'm sure that they are or will eventually. So you see this language from what Singh was saying, like, this has always been our policy. But no, there's been a big change here in the past few months. Last year, there was a ground assault into Belgorod launched by pro-Kiev militias, including the Russian Volunteer Corps, which is really a neo-Nazi militia of people, of Russians who went over to Ukraine to fight in the Donbass war. Lots of Azov battalion veterans in there. So they attacked Belgrade, they used U.S. armored vehicles, and at the time, the U.S. response to those reports was, oh, that's not our policy. We don't want them using U.S. weapons in Russian territory. So things have changed. Things have escalated a lot when it comes to what Ukraine can or cannot do. And I believe that a lot of the Ukrainian covert attacks and all the drone attacks into Russian territory are also supported by the U.S. to some extent. But this is open support for a ground assault into Russia, and there's just raises the risk of escalation. And Ukrainian officials still have not directly acknowledged the assault. They're not really talking about it, but Zelensky made a reference to it, kind of a vague reference to it on Thursday. He said, quote, "Russia brought the war to our land and should feel what it has done," end quote. So we'll see. If you see the South Front map here, it says that they've repelled, that they're kind of pushing the Ukrainians back from these areas, but we'll see how long this lasts, if they're able to gain more territory inside Russia. And then the fighting is still going on along the entire front, and Russia is making gains in the Donbass region. All right, so the next one here, Houthi leader says that Yemen will join attack on Israel. So on Thursday, Houthi leader Abdul Malik al-Houthi vowed the Yemeni group will coordinate with the Axis of Resistance in an attack on Israel in response to Israeli escalations in the region. The Axis includes Iran, Hezbollah, Shia militias that operate in Iraq and Syria, and the Houthis, who are officially known as Ansar Allah. Iran is vowing revenge for the Israeli killing of Hamas's political chief in Tehran, and Hezbollah is warning that it will escalate in response to the Israeli airstrike that killed one of its top military commanders in Beirut. Al-Houthi said Ansar Allah would respond to the July 20th Israeli bombing of Yemen's Red Sea port of Hodeidah, which killed 6 people and caused about $20 million in damage. Israel launched the strikes after a Houthi drone hit Tel Aviv and killed 1 person. I have a picture there of the aftermath. There was fires at the oil refinery that they hit, that they battled for a few days after that. Al-Houthi said, quote, "The inevitable response to the Israeli aggression that targeted the fuel tanks in Hodeidah port is a must, and it is coming, God willing," end quote. So Al-Houthi said the delay in the response from the Axis to the Israeli escalations was a tactical decision. He said, quote, "The decision to respond is a collective decision across the entire Axis and within each front independently," end quote. The Houthi leader said there was a diplomatic push by the U.S., Europe, and some Arab countries to contain the response, but said that Iran was undeterred, saying, quote, "The matter touches upon the honor of the Islamic Republic by the killing of its guest in its capital," end quote. And he also touted recent Houthi attacks on U.S. assets in the region, including the downing of another U.S. MQ-9 Reaper drone. They've taken down a few of those, I think around 5 or 6, since October 7th. They've been able to down a lot of U.S. drones, and those are big, drones that can carry Hellfire missiles and are used for reconnaissance. The U.S. continues to bomb Yemen and intercept Houthi missiles and drones on a near daily basis. There were strikes on Yemen reported on Thursday in the Hodeidah province, and then the day before that, U.S. Central Command claimed that it launched strikes in Yemen and destroyed 2 Houthi drones, a ground control station, and 3 anti-ship cruise missiles. So the U.S. keeps bombing Yemen. They haven't done anything to stop Houthi attacks on shipping in the region. They've only really escalated the situation. So they're saying that they're going to get in on the attack here, and I would, that wouldn't surprise me. So the next one here, the U.S. warns Iran over launching major attack on Israel. So the Wall Street Journal reported Thursday that U.S. officials have issued a threat to Iran, warning of serious consequences to the Iranian economy and the country's new government if it launches a major reprisal attack on Israel for the killing of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. A U.S. official told the paper, quote, "The United States has sent a clear message to Iran that the risk of a major escalation if they do a significant retaliatory attack against Israel is extremely high, end quote. I might have butchered that quote a little bit, but basically what he's saying, the U.S. has warned if Iran launches a big attack, there's going to be big escalation in response. The official said the U.S. expressed, quote, that there is a serious risk of consequences for Iran's economy and the stability of its newly elected government if it goes down that path, end quote. So kind of an ominous warning. And this official said the warnings were given both directly and through intermediaries. Back in April, during the last major escalation in the region that was caused by Israel bombing the Iranian consulate in Damascus, the U.S. and Iran were delivering messages to each other through Oman. So I'm sure something similar is happening. At least there's some kind of communication happening. The U.S. official speaking to the Wall Street Journal insisted the warning to Iran was not a threat that the U.S. would carry out strikes in Iran, but a warning about a robust military response from Israel, which I'm sure the U.S. would support in some way. And the U.S. is also pledging to intervene directly to defend Israel like they did in April. And if this thing does turn into a full-blown war, I mean, the U.S. is going to be involved. If that's what it turns into, I'm sure the U.S. will start helping Israel strike Iran directly. The U.S. officials said they don't have a clear picture of when Iran will launch its reprisal attack or how extensive it will be. The U.S. and Israel think it could be coordinated with Hezbollah and other Iranian allies in the region. And that's what they're all either saying directly, like al-Houthi, or kind of hinting at. Nasrallah said, they're either going to launch their response alone or with the Axis. There was also another report from Politico, U.S. officials saying that they think Iran might be reconsidering launching a major multi-pronged attack due to U.S. pressure and threats, basically. But we'll see. Again, I'm seeing all sorts of... I read today people and sources saying the attack is expected to happen Thursday night. Maybe also I saw Friday night, Saturday, Sunday. People are just predicting every day. All right. So the next one here, Israeli airstrikes target central Syria, wounding 4 soldiers. So Israeli airstrikes targeted central Syria on Thursday as tensions are soaring in the region. A Syrian military source told Al Mayadeen that the strikes targeted several military sites and injured 4 Syrian soldiers. The strikes were launched at about 8:55 p.m. local time, so that's Thursday night in Syria, from the direction of northern Lebanon. Israel typically does not comment on its airstrikes in Syria, and the Israeli military declined to give a statement to Reuters when asked about the attack. So Israel's been bombing Syria for years, and they really ramped up those airstrikes after October 7th, and they've targeted Iranians, not just the consulate bombing, which killed a very senior IRGC general and other officers, but they killed a few IRGC advisors between October 7th and that consulate bombing. But that was just too they bombed the Iranian embassy in the middle of the day in Damascus. So Iran responded to that one. And also on Thursday, the clashes between the Arab tribes in eastern Syria they're fighting the SDF, which is the Kurdish group that's backed by the U.S. Those clashes continued. Al Mayadeen also reported on that, saying that the Syrian army, so the Syrian government forces, shelled SDF positions and that the U.S. supported SDF artillery strikes. It wasn't exactly clear how the U.S. supported it, but I'm sure the U.S. is helping the Kurds in some way fight that battle. So just another fight that the U.S. is involved in the region. And so... there's just so many different conflicts just within Syria still. You have the Al-Qaeda controls a good portion of Idlib in the northwest still. You have these Turkish-backed militants who occupy towns in northern Syria, and they fight the Kurds, and Turkey fights the Kurds, and the Kurds fight these tribes. There's also ISIS attacking. They've been attacking the government forces lately. There's just a lot of little battles kind of always going on inside Syria still. And a big reason why is because the U.S. continues to occupy a large portion of the country. All right, the next one here. No Gaza truce unless the U.S. pressures Israel. So a hostage and ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas will not happen unless the U.S. puts pressure on Netanyahu. And this was reported by the Times of Israel on Wednesday, and they cited Arab officials from Egypt and Qatar, which are the mediating countries. Basically, they're getting fed up, not just with Israel, but also with the U.S. And these officials are saying the only one who's got the leverage to really put pressure on Israel is the U.S., and they're not doing it. They have the military aid leverage. One official said that one thing they could do is put the blame on Netanyahu, because we saw it was May 31st, Biden came out and unveiled that ceasefire proposal that he claimed Israel was on board with, even though, it said there would be a permanent ceasefire starting in the second phase. And then as soon as Biden came out with it, Netanyahu was saying, no permanent ceasefire, basically rejecting kind of a big part of it. And then, for about a month, all the U.S. was saying is, oh, no, it's Hamas. Hamas is the only obstacle here. And then Hamas did end up demanding a commitment to a permanent ceasefire and withdrawal right in the beginning in response to what Netanyahu was saying. So then they said it's all Hamas's fault. And then Hamas made the concession and agreed not to seek the permanent ceasefire up front. And then Netanyahu added all these demands. But throughout this whole time, the U.S. is just blaming Hamas. So these Arab officials are saying, you could at least, say Netanyahu is the one blocking this thing, because they say he's been the main obstacle. And just on Wednesday, you had the White House basically say, oh, it's up to Sinwar now for there to be a deal. This is John Kirby. He said, quote, as the chief decision maker, Sinwar needs to decide how now to take this deal, to get a ceasefire in place, to get some of those hostages home, and to get us all an opportunity to get more humanitarian assistance in. He needs to accept the deal, end quote. And then Kirby was asked, well, is Netanyahu, an obstacle to a deal? Is Netanyahu refusing to sign a deal? He did not. He just dodged the question and just kind of said another statement about the ceasefire talks. So, and then as I covered yesterday, Israeli media is reporting that the U.S. is willing to give Israel a guarantee that it would be able to restart the genocidal campaign in Gaza after the first phase of a ceasefire. And one reason why we've seen the Israeli military say that it wants a ceasefire deal is because they want to give their forces a rest. Not because they want to end this thing permanently, but because they want time to recuperate. And we've actually seen Israeli officials involved in the negotiations saying that they've said, like, I've tried to tell Netanyahu we'll be able to restart even if we agree to a permanent ceasefire. We'll be able to figure out a way to restart things. But so Netanyahu hasn't wanted even a temporary ceasefire. All right. So the next one here, Qatar, Egypt, and the U.S. invite Israel and Hamas to resume ceasefire talks. So this is from Al Jazeera. And this was on Thursday that the U.S., Egypt, and Qatar put out a statement saying that Israel and Hamas should resume talks to reach a ceasefire. They said in a statement, quote, it is the time to conclude a ceasefire agreement and release hostages and prisoners. We have worked for months to reach framework agreement, and it is now on the table with only details of implementation missing, end quote. So they're saying that both sides should resume negotiations on August 15th, so next week. I think Israel said that they're going to send negotiators, no word from Hamas yet. But there is the risk of, obviously, the Iranian reprisal and then the region just exploding into a full-blown war is certainly possible, and that would disrupt things, of course. And then the question is the U.S. really going to put the screws on Netanyahu to agree to a deal? I think Biden and whoever is doing the thinking in the administration probably wants a ceasefire deal before the election. They think it would probably help Kamala Harris. But again, they're saying, and I think they might, that's why we're seeing them tell Netanyahu, don't worry about it. You're going to be able to restart this thing. We could just use a little calm. So I think, the the best thing we could hope for is that a deal does happen, and then during that calm, there's more support to make it a permanent ceasefire or something. But I don't know. I'm not holding my breath for anything good to happen here, but I think that would be the best case scenario. But who knows what's going to happen? And the U.S. is really going to have to put the pressure on, and I don't really have any confidence in this administration to do that. We might hear a lot of complaining and whining from them, but as long as they give the weapons, the bombs, the cover to Israel to continue this slaughter in Gaza, it's going to keep going unless the U.S. decides to really yank Israel's chain, which is what it will take to stop this. All right, so the next one here, Arab states reject U.S. plan to send peacekeepers to Gaza. So this one is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. 3 Arab states approached by the U.S. about sending its soldiers to the Gaza Strip in a peacekeeping role rejected the idea. 2 other Muslim countries expressed interest in participating in the mission that would begin after Israel ends its onslaught. The Times of Israel reported that Jordan, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia refused the U.S. request to send peacekeepers to Gaza. One Arab official said that Amman, Doha, and Riyadh viewed the mission as protecting Israel from the Palestinians. Egypt and the UAE have taken different positions and expressed a willingness to join such a mission. Their participation is contingent upon Washington's involvement in any agreement between the Palestinians and Israelis. So this is kind of a pipe dream at this point, because a peacekeeping mission they would need to get a ceasefire. They would need to get a permanent ceasefire and Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. And again, talk about the things Netanyahu said, the things people in his government. It's clear that they want permanent occupation of Gaza. They want what they really want to do is kick all the Palestinians out, cleanse the strip of the Palestinians, or kill them all and take it over. So we're, I just, to me, any idea of a plan like this just seems so far away. But we'll see. All right, so the next one here, Kamala Harris aides reject Israel arms embargo. So this one is from Middle East Eye. So Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris's team has publicly disavowed suggestions that she is open to an arms embargo on Israel, a day after progressive activists described an openness from the vice president to discuss regulating military aid to Israel. In a statement from Harris's campaign, the U.S. vice president said that she has been clear. I'll wait, hang on a second. Sorry, I got messed up there. So the statement said, quote, "She has been clear she will always work to ensure Israel is able to defend itself against Iran and Iran-backed terrorist groups," end quote. So what happened here is that some activists with the Uncommitted movement in Michigan, I guess, met with her and said, she expressed an openness to an arms embargo, to discussing the idea of, cutting off military aid to Israel or regulating it. And then they came out with this statement saying, no, that's not going to happen. And then if you saw at this rally in, where was she? I think in Detroit. So in Michigan, some protesters came in and were chanting about Gaza. And she, I think it's in here. She said something like, it's if you keep saying that, Donald Trump is going to win or something. So that's how she addressed the protesters. Very, very dismissive. Just saying, that they're going to help Trump win. Here's the quote. So they came in, they're chanting, and this is Michigan, Detroit. I mean, there's a lot of Arabs and Muslims in Michigan, and that's why one of the activists who met with her, has family who's been killed in Gaza. She said, quote, "You know what? If you want Donald Trump to win, then say that. Otherwise, I'm speaking," end quote. So that's her response to the anti-war protesters. All right, so the next one here, Israeli strikes kill at least 56 Palestinians across Gaza. This is from Mondo Weiss. This is they do like kind of a daily update on the situation in Gaza. So this is day 307, which, I mean, it's over 10 months now that this has been happening, but 307 days, we're getting close to a year. And there were strikes across Gaza, very heavy bombardment, at least 56 Palestinians killed. 2 UN schools that were sheltering Palestinians were killed. The schools were targeted, and at least 15 people were killed in those strikes. So again, very heavy. And where were these strikes? These were in central Gaza, and but they've been bombing across the strip, and they have some numbers here. So according to Gaza's health ministry, their latest numbers, they put the death toll at 39,699 and the number of wounded at 91,722. So that, if you add that together, that's 130,000 casualties altogether. And their number is considered a low estimate since the death toll does not include the people who are presumed to be dead under the rubble, which is many thousands. And there's other we've seen the reports of Israeli soldiers shooting people dead in the street and then covering their bodies up, just burying them right away, and they don't get counted. Just a complete horror show, and it's not stopping. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. boycotts Nagasaki A-bomb ceremony for Israel. So the U.S. ambassador to Japan, Rahm Emanuel, will boycott Friday's memorial service in Nagasaki commemorating the 79th anniversary of the U.S. dropping a nuclear bomb on the city because Israel was not invited to attend. So it's Nagasaki Day, the 79th anniversary of the U.S. dropping a nuclear bomb on the city. Israel doesn't get invited, which I think makes sense. And the U.S. refuses to attend, or the ambassador refuses to attend. Emanuel said the ceremony had become politicized by the decision not to invite Israel, but Russia and Belarus have not been invited. This is the third year that they'll be excluded from the ceremony, and the U.S. supported that idea. So not only the U.S. ambassador, but ambassadors from the U.K., Canada, France, Germany, Italy, and the European Union, they are all expected to not send their ambassadors. They're going to send like lower level officials. And they're doing this again, all for Israel. And they said in a letter, they actually wrote a letter to the city complaining about it, saying that they would equate Israel with Russia and Belarus by not inviting Israel. So Belarus, Russia used Belarus's territory to launch an initial part of the invasion, but they haven't been involved in the war in Ukraine. Besides that, and once Russia pulled out of the north, they haven't used Belarus's territory since then. But anyway, so Nagasaki Mayor Shiro Suzuki stuck to his decision not to invite Israel despite the pressure. He said it was due to concerns that Israeli attendance could lead to demonstrators disrupting the ceremony. He said, quote, "I will continue to persevere and ask for understanding of the decision as often as necessary." End quote. He said he made the decision not for political reasons, but to ensure that the ceremony went smoothly. Israel's ambassador to Japan was invited to Hiroshima's ceremony on Tuesday, which was attended by the U.S. ambassador and the other Western ambassadors. So one reason why I say Israel should not be invited to the ceremony is, besides just the conduct of what they've done in Gaza, it's also things that they've compared it to. Israeli officials have pointed to the U.S. and allied bombings of Japan and Germany during World War II to justify the mass slaughter of Palestinians in Gaza. And they've mentioned the dropping of the atomic bomb specifically. And this isn't just some, politicians in the Knesset or some Israeli pundits on TV. Netanyahu himself actually brought this up with President Biden, according to President Biden. Biden said this back in December 2023. This is when he said that Israel was bombing Gaza indiscriminately, but that didn't change his support for Israel. Biden said, quote, "It was pointed out to me that by Bibi that, well, you carpet bombed Germany, you dropped the atom bomb, a lot of civilians died," end quote. So in this conversation with Netanyahu that he had, Biden said Netanyahu, if Biden was being critical of all the civilians being killed, then Netanyahu said, well, look at World War II. You killed all these civilians. You dropped the atomic bombs on civilians. So they're actually using this massacre in Nagasaki and the massacre in Hiroshima and all the massacres in World War II, Dresden, the firebombing of Tokyo, to justify a current day massacre. And that's the thing about the dropping of the atomic bombs. It's a kind of I think a huge propaganda narrative for the U.S. This idea, what I was taught in school when I was a kid, was that there was two choices. Either the U.S. invaded Japan, millions could have died, including a lot of Americans, or they had to drop the atomic bombs on civilians. It was one or the other, and that was it. And it was such a tough decision to make, but it was probably, the right decision to drop these nuclear bombs to vaporize hundreds of thousands of women and children. And like, that's kind of what I thought for a while as I grew up. It wasn't until I was older that I realized, oh, wait, actually killing civilians like that is wrong. And then I learned that, many high-level military officials at the time did not think they should drop it, including Eisenhower and MacArthur. And there was the strategic bombing survey. Basically, Japan would have surrendered without dropping these bombs. And, again, just the narrative that, we had to do it. We had to kill all these civilians. I think it really it's seeped into a lot of people's minds. So when something like Gaza happens, then it can be used to justify, what is just a mass slaughter of civilians. But anyway, Scott Horton, I mentioned it on Hiroshima Day. He put together a list of, who opposed nuking Japan. That's the name of the article. It's on antiwar.com and also at the Libertarian Institute if you want to check it out. There's also an article by Brett Wilkins that we run every year. We ran it on Hiroshima Day. It's called False Dichotomy, about the nuclear bombing, invasion or dropping the nukes. And he gets into that if you want to check that out. So that is it for the news for today. Go check out our Viewpoints, one from James Carden, Time to Adopt a No First Use Nuclear Policy. One from Greg Mitchell, Nagasaki, the Forgotten Bomb. One from Pat Elder, Japan-U.S. Joint Statement on War Preparations Forecasts Doom. That's another thing. Talk about Japan, World War II. The U.S. is preparing for a war with China in the region, and Japan, if that happens, a lot of Japan is going to be destroyed, including Okinawa, where something like 500,000 civilians were killed in the Battle of Okinawa between the U.S. and Japan. I mean, it's just, it's just crazy. One from William Hartung and Hekmat Abu Khadr, Cashing in on Nukes. One from David Meyer, We Need a Peace Movement to Prevent Nuclear War. So please go check that out. We also have a Nagasaki section of a few stories about the bombing. So that's it for me for this week. I hope everybody has a good weekend. We'll see. We might see the Iranian attack. I'm always worried that I post the show and then they're going to attack. But I think it could happen this weekend, but it might not happen. I really don't know. But we're definitely in dangerous waters right now for the risk of a big escalation. But, hopefully the U.S. does not get, hopefully this doesn't turn into a major war. But anyway, that's it for me. You could always support this show by sharing it. Tell your friends about antiwar.com. Like, subscribe, comment, all that stuff. That is it. I will talk to you after the weekend. Thanks for listening.